Good morning. How's everybody doing? Fantastic, thank you. First time I'm wearing glasses for speech. Yes, I'm over 40. It's happening, folks. First of all, I'd just like to thank the AASP Conference Organizing Committee for inviting me here and really creating this space for over the last 34 years. This event brings special people together, and it's truly an honor to be amongst such dedicated and accomplished professionals. I'd also like to recognize and give a special thank you to two people. The first is Dr. Alicia Carter, who was my first contact and introduction to AASP 5 years ago and invited me to speak on a panel here. And I have so much respect for the work that you do in diversity and inclusion, so thank you. And the second person is Dr. Colleen Hacker, who is my first official sports psychologist. And I met her in college, and I really learned from her a lot at that time and throughout my professional days. But she taught me not only about the benefits to sports and sports psychology, but really helped me to understand how to navigate my own psyche and really enjoy the different dynamics within sports and within team culture. And finally, thanks to all of you for being here, for showing up, and being open to listening to what I'll be sharing today. And just like the last time I was at this conference, it brings up a mix of emotions for me. So being a little bit more evolved now, I dove deep into what those emotions really meant and what I was feeling. So there's definitely that feeling of excitement and energy for the conference itself, and all of you and your energy and the reconnecting that goes on here, and really the learning as well. And for me, it's exciting to be around places that allow for learning and growth because I grew up with two educators in my home. Both of my parents were college professors, so the importance of education was always stressed in our household. Being here also brings up a little bit of intimidation as well, if I'm being honest. In part, it's because I know I'm surrounded by intelligent people who spend their lives around conversations, research, and application of some of the topics in which we'll be speaking about today. But just like anything, it's really all about my mommy issues. I mentioned my parents were college professors, but I failed to mention that my mother was a psychology professor who still is a practicing clinical psychologist. And growing up, my friends really had mixed emotions about visiting my home. You know, my parents were definitely those team parents that would, have no problem adopting my teammates. So everybody loved Mr. and Mrs. Hucles, but I'd say my friends were split about 50-50 in having any small-sided conversations with my mom. Pretty much all my friends thought conversations with her would lead to a psychoanalysis of their current state and situation. Some of my friends loved that, and others feared it. And then I realized it also brings up that time that I got a D in my Psych 101 class my first year of college. And my mom sat me down and asked why I was acting out against her. So I'm truly happy to be here. And I'll most likely need to talk to a few of you after being slightly triggered. But in all seriousness, thank you so much for having me here. I love being in and around conversations about sport. It's something that has really given me so much to my life and helped me to be the person that I am today and created incredible opportunities and life experiences. And sport is such a powerful vehicle. And today I'll be talking about how to forge space for advocacy in sport and why this is so necessary now. So I thought it was important to just kind of go to the foundation level. And why is sport, what is sport, and what is it really? And from a very early age, many of us, if we're lucky, are exposed to sports and sport culture, whether it's through family, maybe watching sports at home or going out to a sporting event, even at school in physical education classes, or with friends on the playground. Whatever the case, there's early exposure to what we call sport. At first, it may be foursquare or hopscotch, or just racing a friend down past the swing set. But sport is primarily introduced as a game you play, or a physical activity that you can have fun doing, or even compete with one another in a healthy way. Sport can be and is a profession. Whether you're an athlete, a coach, administrator, psychologist, physical therapist, commentator, sport provides career opportunities, and there's a business side to sport. Sport can also be a place, providing safe spaces, a home, a place to stand out and know that that's okay. It's okay to stand out. It's okay to be different. And dare I say, encouraged to do so, especially if you have a good coach or an advocate in your corner. And maybe that's how other people define sport, but I know it's how I today look at it. Sport to me encapsulates all of this. It's a place where no matter what, I feel most like myself, most comfortable, and most confident, as well as most vulnerable. Sport's its own bubble and society, and there are rules within individual sports, within teams, building team culture, and there's a culture of sport. This picture is of my very first soccer team I played for, the Tan Stingers. I think I was the one who named them. I was 7 years old, and I actually have one specific memory about this picture, and that was one of feeling special. I'm pretty sure it's because they gave me the soccer ball to hold in the picture. But as you can see, I'm the only girl on this team. So from the very first moment I was introduced to sport, I was different. I'm not implying that it was something negative, but just a differentiator, and something that made me stand out. And I had a lot of introductory lessons about the sport of soccer and life with the Tan Stingers. And there are two stories that I'll share with you about this time. And the first was a memory that takes me back to a nice Saturday morning as a 7-year-old with this team, and we were playing in the soccer game, and it was the second half, and all of a sudden, at that age, it's herd ball. You just have a pack of kids just following around the ball. And I broke free of the pack. And I remember running so fast and looking around me, and there was nobody else in sight. No other defenders. All I saw was the goal and the goalkeeper. And I could hear all the cheering on the sideline, everyone waving and raising their hands and shouting and cheering. And I took a shot on goal, and I looked up, and the goalkeeper saved it. And I had this fear take over me. And I realized I just shot against my own goalkeeper, that it was the second half, and I forgot about the rule that you change sides and directions. And those cheers on the sidelines from my parents and my coaches were actually saying, "Angela, you're going the wrong way, go the other way." So that was embarrassing. But the lesson here was around rules and structure. And just understanding in a way as a 7-year-old could, that there's still a system that I had to follow in order to succeed. It wasn't just about putting the ball in the back of the net, but making sure I went in the right direction, working with my teammates, the ones in the same jerseys as me, and doing all of this against a different group of people in different jerseys. All the kids on the field didn't have the same objective as I did, but we were grouped separately and had different objectives that we were trying to accomplish at the same time. There was another boys' team that I played shortly after the Tan Stingers, another neighborhood soccer team, and I had a lot of great success with this group, scoring a lot of goals, having a lot of fun. During that season, apparently, I had become recognized. Having success with the boys' teams and playing against other boys' teams, some parents complained. So that neighborhood league made a new rule that if you were a girl, you could only play on other girls' teams and boys on boys' teams. And the issue and reason that I was playing on that team to begin with was because there weren't many soccer teams to play on, and certainly not as many girls' soccer teams, especially in my neighborhood. So at a very early age, I was introduced, even though I didn't fully understand it, issues around gender and the inequalities that existed and exist. Both in the lack of available opportunities for someone like me, a girl, but also people's discomfort and maybe even fears when it came to seeing a girl being successful, dominant, and better than a lot of the boys. So as we break down what sport is in our society, it starts off as just an activity, a game, but it transforms into something much larger than what we may originally know as a child in a playground or in a PE class. And so it becomes fascinating when you start to really evaluate this powerful thing that we call sport and start to pull back those layers. At the core of sport, what I found to be true is this. Sport is the vehicle that allows opportunities to be physically healthy, mentally strong, socially competent, and self-confident. And that's a strong and powerful vehicle and tool to have as a young person as you're developing into a member of society and to be able to hold on to as an adult. And I believe Nelson Mandela said it best when he said that sport has the power to change the world. It has the power to inspire. It has the power to unite people in a way that little else does. It speaks to youth in a language they understand. Sport can create hope where once there was only despair. It's more powerful than government in breaking down racial barriers. Frequently, we hear of the power of sport and the influence that it has. But what does that actually mean? I've highlighted just a few here that I feel are important, and just we'll touch on briefly. And starting with sport being a language translator. Sport provides a platform. It can also be therapeutic. Sport teaches us about important life lessons, and sport has this wonderful and unique ability to empower groups and individuals, as well as unifying and bringing people together, even in unlucky circumstances. One of the things that I understood to be really powerful about sport was actually through my travels. Going to different countries, I would observe different cultural issues and values around sport. And I also recognize the power of it being one of the best conversation starters, not in verbally talking to a stranger, but actually something deeper. Being able to connect and find commonalities with a complete stranger without even saying a word. When I carried around a soccer ball or started to juggle it, a whole new world opened up. I had the unique opportunity to travel to different countries on behalf of the US State Department with a program that sends athletes to assist in diplomatic relations. And every time that I landed in another country and was able to take a soccer ball out, I would start to juggle the ball around a park or a playground, any place that had kids around especially, and all of a sudden I'd have a few different kids start to come up to me. And they'd just watch at first, and then a few more would come in, and the next thing you know, we had an international friendly on our hands. And this slide shows pictures of that experience on one of my trips, and this one was to Namibia. And I was interacting and communicating with a sport language, a shared language without using an actual word. And common ground had been created there. It opened up a space of understanding and connection without knowing any history, any background about anyone else around. I think it's important to also note that we're in this wonderful time when mental health is being talked about more readily. It's even becoming more mainstream with meditation apps. But it's easy to remember and understand the physical benefits of sports, but many of our school systems have started to remove physical education from their curriculum at a time when I think we probably need it the most. I worked with the sports-based youth development organization that did training for coaches where we could show scientific research on how sports and physical activity provided positive brain stimulation and how students performed better in their classes when they started off the day with sports and physical activity. Sport allows an opportunity for individuals who respond to physical activity, a space to open up and find strength through vulnerability. As an introvert, I struggled a little bit in figuring out ways to socially connect when I was growing up. But I found when I was playing sports, I could communicate better and feel more comfortable opening up to someone. And it actually just literally happened to me last month with a colleague of mine who convinced me to play some basketball the day before we were going to commentate a game. And I realized during that time how much I started talking while we were playing basketball together and sharing. And just that simple act of shooting hoops helped to create a more vulnerable space for me to share and connect with my colleague. One of the best instructors that I've really ever had was through being on sports teams. and by learning in a different, more experiential way versus just out of books and in a classroom. I mean, this isn't the association of sports psychology, but applied sports psychology. Learning from books is great to get your head around a concept, but what I love most about sports is you're allowed the experience of putting into practice the applications of theories yourself, examining what works and what doesn't. And to me, that's the life adventure and something experiential to teach us and help us grow. It provides structure to follow and replicate in other areas of life, and whether it's lessons on leadership or goal setting, or just learning ways to trust other people, these are skills that we get to practice through the life of sport, and then take them with us to those classrooms, those boardrooms, or even at home. Sport also unifies and empowers, and walking around the Olympic Village was probably one of the most special and, I'd say, unique experiences that I've had in my life. Yes, it was thrilling simply just to be at the Olympics, to be on Olympic teams, and of course to win gold medals. But when you go through a unique and shared experience with other human beings, there's not a lot else that can really match that. And something that quantifies, I think, the specialness of the Olympics, aside from seeing incredible peak performances, is that it's an event bringing diversity, whether it's racially, culturally, politically, linguistically, bringing all of these differences on our planet together, while also honoring and celebrating the differences. And there's a reason why it's called the Olympic movement. Seeing so many different flags represented by different countries, people literally from all over the world, different colors, variety of skills, stories, and backgrounds. I've never seen so many things that were different while also feeling so connected and similar to those people I was surrounded by. And sport does that. Shared experiences create a basis of understanding for one another, humanizes each other. It brings us to a base level of connection. And from there, we can begin to talk about differences and approach each other in respectful ways. Oftentimes, disagreements derive from misunderstanding, sometimes because we've had different life experiences, or we don't really know another person's story. Sharing in an Olympic experience is one that breaks those barriers. Even though an athlete I meet in the Olympic Village may have a completely different life view, values, we each at least have an understanding of what it took to be standing in that same time and space together. The sacrifices, the time, the energy, and the determination. And the Olympics puts all of this on display. A single event gathers the attention of the entire planet, and we all can participate together. In that moment, we each see similarities for one another. We as a race of people, a human race, need to use this as an example for humanity. This is how we create change and better life experiences. And finally, sport provides a wonderful platform for people who may not otherwise have the opportunity to bring attention to relevant topics, while also providing an opportunity to make topics relevant. One of the most visible sports figures right now in our country, a former teammate, Megan Rapinoe, she has been able to translate her performance and presence on the soccer field and with the U.S. soccer team to create a much larger platform than she would have had without sports. Using the platform of the sport of soccer and also one of the largest sporting events, the FIFA Women's World Cup, this past summer she leveraged the sporting opportunity to display her skills, her talents, and more importantly, her beliefs, to message them to an audience of people who probably would not have had the ability or chance to connect with her without it. Megan's visibility as an individual was compounded through that platform of sport. The U.S. soccer team as a group also has visibility because of the platform of sport. Even though there are just 23 players on any given World Cup roster, being a former player of the team creates an opportunity for others, like myself, to have a much larger platform to use than we would have if we didn't play for that team at one point. The group has more visibility, and the individuals of the group do as well. So why now? What is it about the combination of sport, advocacy, and this time? And when we take a look at the history of advocacy with sport, we see how sport amplifies any movement, especially when teams or groups of individuals within sport band together. Probably everyone in this room will remember this iconic picture of the 1968 Olympics Black Power salute. When two black athletes, Tommie Smith and John Carlos, each raised a black glove fist during the US national anthem while on the Olympic podium. And the person who actually tends to get left out of the story a lot is the silver medalist, Australian Peter Norman, who agreed before stepping on the podium to support the US athletes, to stand in solidarity, wearing a human rights badge on his jacket, along with the other two. So many of us associate this as a political statement of a Black Power salute, when it was actually the intention of Tommie Smith for it to symbolize a human rights salute. And all three Olympians wore the Olympic Project for Human Rights badge in this picture. So we're accustomed to seeing sport be this place where topics of religion or politics frequently intermix. And I think because we've seen this happen enough, I'm always a little bit shocked when an athlete makes a political statement or gets involved in a political campaign. And some people react with, athletes shouldn't speak about politics. And I personally interpret that statement, whether intentional or not, as a person trying to take away an individual's voice, an athlete's voice. And even deeper, it strikes me as a fear-based mentality, but shows how powerful that sport platform and sport space really is to advocate from. UNC soccer coach and legend, Anson Dorrance, considered by many to be not only one of the greatest soccer coaches in the game, but one of the greatest advocates of women's soccer players. To say he will forever leave his mark on the game is a bit of an understatement, I'd say. The profound impact professionals within the sports industry, a coach, a trainer, a therapist, is still a bit undervalued, I think. Anson Dorrance has had a lot of recognitions for his accomplishments in the sports and soccer world, but there are many people and individuals who are highly impactful to the people that they teach. And just because people or places aren't receiving the recognition doesn't mean it's not happening. There's tremendous positive influence that practitioners in the sports world have in shaping and supporting or shifting a movement. Anson is what I'll call a shapeshifter, one of those people who has impacted so many other influential people, players, coaches, professionals, a leader in sports advocacy. And I spoke to Anson last month in preparation to commentate for a UNC game. And toward the end of that conversation, we shifted a little bit down memory lane. I probably had a handful of conversations with Anson in my lifetime. But eventually he said to me, Angela, if you were a man who accomplished all that you have through sports, you would have been a millionaire. And I kind of chuckled on the call and passively agreed, but of all the things that we talked about, that was a statement that stuck with me after the call. Anson was absolutely correct. The level that I reached in sports as a 10-year professional athlete, two-time Olympic gold medalist, two-time Women's World Cup medalist, representing my country for nearly a decade in my sport of soccer, a man with the same resume and accomplishments would have created a much different looking bank account than mine through our playing careers. And my teammate, Abby Wambach, openly discussed this topic about money in sports after winning the same ESPY Icon Award in 2016, as our colleagues pictured here. Within their respective sports, these three elite athletes, Peyton, Abby, and Kobe, accomplished similar stature and accolades, and similar dominance within their sport. Yet stepping away from their court and fields, Peyton and Kobe were set up very differently financially than Abby was. And additionally, the distribution of endorsement and sponsorship money for female athletes looks a lot different than their male counterparts. But also the opportunities that exist for male athletes, even once they're finished participating in sport, are much greater than female athletes. That can come in the form of endorsements, commercials, appearances, but also in executive management, coaching positions, or in the media side and business of sports as well. So why now? Why pay attention to advocacy now? It's because we're living in a time that has a culture of advocacy. We are living in a time of movements. There's a shift that you can just feel that's happening right now, a momentum to the issues which are coming up. From Time's Up, Me Too, equal pay, transgender athletes' participation in sport, everything is here and at the forefront and has this feeling of force behind it, like it's not going to go away until it's solved or at least pushed in the right direction. And when we look at issues like racial equality, gender equality, equal pay, it's shifting slowly, but we're not there yet. But through sport, national conversations can happen about the existence of racial injustice. There are even more examples for boys and men to positively respect women, which is just as important as how females can feel confident and empowered seeing others like them. The U.S. women's national team is the best in the world, and really always have been at least one of the best throughout their team's history. They are much more successful than the men's team, but in some countries it's virtually ensured that this doesn't happen because women's programs and girls' development is just ignored. And we see this by their lack of funding, lack of resources. The difference between even just 10 years ago and now, with an issue like this, is we're recognizing and have an awareness with the existence of women in a different way than in the past. It's not just focusing on making sure a woman's soccer program exists. A 7-year-old girl looking for an all-girls soccer team to play for in the neighborhood that I grew up in now has several competitive soccer teams that she can go try out for. Now these new opportunities exist that weren't there before. So the change and shift is that now people are speaking up about the inequality and injustices, preventing forward movement versus having a place. We're starting to see new faces at the tables. But now it's about being heard there. And there are more people uniting and advocating for the right change. Social media has provided a dynamic duo platform with sport. And no other time has it been more powerful and more effective to advocate, to get your message out, to start a movement as it is now with social media. This is a new platform that some athletes have actually been able to use and even find ways to monetize, in addition to reach larger audiences to advance social change. And we're awake now. We're awake in a way that we haven't ever been before. Politics over this last presidential term have activated some of us that may have been more dormant before, no matter what political affiliation you have. If you don't understand what I mean through this picture, we can have a separate conversation. I'll explain it to you later. So what do we need to do? The first thing is to realize the importance and the important roles that we each play. Many of us have the opportunity to provide the physical and mental spaces for athletes to use their platforms. Athletes need positive influencers early on in their development. And by creating safe spaces, allowing conversations, being a voice, being an ear, treating sport with respect of the power that it holds, we as individuals can and should take on those roles and responsibilities in our professional and personal circles. Quite simply stated, this industry needs more shapeshifters. It's also important to be present in the lives of athletes. The impact that you can have on the athletes that you work with for a short period or a long period can be of great significance. I think we also have a responsibility to pay attention to the life cycles of athletes. From the time a young person enters sport, there's a point that will come very quickly that determines whether that young person will continue with sports or not. And he or she will be surrounded by different influences determining outcomes of that sport experience. And unfortunately, there are many barriers to entry, one of which is our pay-to-play model, making it difficult for specific socioeconomic groups to even have a chance of experiencing something that can be so healthy and empowering. what type of access everyone has to sports, and how we can provide more safe spaces to our youth is still a current issue. And there are all areas we all need to look to improve, but we need more advocates in these spaces. And then the more assistance is needed with the transition out of sport as well. I think we underutilize athletes who give their lives to sport, and these athletes need professionals who can help with all the different ramifications and changes that are very unexpected when you retire or when you step away from sports participation. It's in college, but especially at those elite levels as well. And I believe we need more professionals to specialize in this niche and to have better access for those athletes to utilize working with these professionals. Every woman pictured here, at some point in her sports experience, came across a time when she interacted or worked with someone like yourself. From the time that I was a little girl with pigtails, being introduced to the sport of soccer and loving those orange slices at halftime, until now, I'm someone who has tremendously benefited from a role that you've played. So I ask you all to continue with this movement of advocacy within the sport work that you do. And I leave all of you with your next homework assignment. Continue the conversations with your colleagues, with your athletes. Continue creating those safe spaces for the issues our society faces through sport. And perhaps the biggest challenge with this is being able to create the safe space when there are opposing viewpoints that need to be shared and determining where there is common ground. And finally, be involved and be the shapeshifters and pass the torch to the future ones to forge that space for advocacy in sport. Thank you. And I believe we have a little bit of time for some questions as well. Hi. I can. Can you guys hear him?
So I was just, oh, there we go. So I was wondering, in terms of kind of with coaching, and especially youth coaching, looking at the difference between when you have the coaches who are screamers, you have the coaches who don't keep score, and then you have the coaches who are teachers and wonderful and everything else. And we have the full range. Yeah. And it is a life lesson, whichever coach you have, you're going to learn life lessons. But in terms of your own experiences or your perception of what would be the greatest gift we could give to youth for having the right coaches at the right places, are there any avenues, are there any resources, are there any things you're aware of that help to teach those people who are going to have such an influence with the youth?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think what tends to happen a lot of times is we have parents and volunteers and people at the youth level coaching our kids. And it's great that we have volunteers, but that's when you start to learn the basic foundations of a game and of that sport. So I think we actually need some of our more trained and better coaches earlier on for our youth. But I think it's also using programs, using curriculum to emphasize and focus on the fun of sport. Research shows us that that's the number one reason that children exit sports is because they're not having fun anymore. So I think the emphasis and focus needs to shift a little bit in how we're actually preparing our coaches, whether they're volunteers or more trained coaches, to switch the emphasis and really have that be the framework and the culture around our youth sport.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. I would like to know your experience in finding the balance between advocating for an athlete yourself and then encouraging them to advocate for themselves.
So, sorry, say one more time.
Finding the balance between advocating for an athlete yourself as a sports psychologist and then encouraging them as the athlete to advocate for themselves.
Yeah. I mean, it's great to try and find a balance. I don't know if there really is one.
Just
but I
kind
think
of what your
it's-
experience has been.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those things where I mentioned Dr. Colleen Hacker before, and just the impact that she's had on me, and I feel very grateful that I was able to meet her in college versus later on in life. I mean, I was kind of doing some of my preparation and mental preparation and visualization even before coming in here. So those are things that I was taught, and they're tools that need to be practiced. And I think what's really impactful is when you can talk to an athlete and just pin it up as you're giving X amount of time to go do repetition on, shooting a basketball and doing free throws. And it's the same type of repetition that we need to place importance on in terms of how we develop our mental skills as well. So I think they go hand in hand. I don't know if there's really a ton of difference actually between the two in terms of advocating for that athlete and really showing the skills to provide them to do it themselves. I think the messaging is still very the same, but I think in advocating for the athlete, you're giving them the skills. That is part of the advocacy work as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's keep switching.
Hello. So my question's a little bit outside of the realm of when you're in a community of people that support your mind of advocacy in sport, it's easy to feel like people hear you and you can make a change. When you were a young woman and you're trying to promote change, there's a lot of environments where people are oh, you don't know what you're talking about, or you're kind of going up against a rip current, people you feel not as inspired. So when you were going through wanting to promote change, what was it that kept you feeling oh, I'm gonna be brave, I'm finding inspiration in these areas, how did you find your support group and what kept you inspired to keep changing?
Yeah, and I think it's critical the people that you surround yourself with, absolutely, in any walk of life, for whatever you're trying to do. I think I was very fortunate to have very supportive parents and just had a home environment that was conducive to being able to learn and grow and face fear and doubt and be rebuilt with my self-confidence. I think coaches have a critical importance with that as well. And I think having more of the mental health side and mental skills that are developed earlier on in a child's life is something that can help really that child develop and learn and grow and get stronger in those skill sets. So if you're not in that environment already, then find your tribe, find your people, where when you do get knocked down, you'll be around that support to lift you back up again.
Thank you.
Thank you. One more? Okay, one more question.
Hi, thank you for the powerful message. In reflecting on your conversation about all of the benefits that come out of sport participation, particularly life lessons that athletes can learn, totally agree. I think that's a really great benefit of sport, and I'm wondering how you might approach having the conversations about transferring those skills into their lives, because I think there's a possibility that they may not realize how impactful their sport experience can be. Yeah. So how might you go about that, or what are some effective ways that you have been able to do that with athletes?
Yeah, and I see this a lot too when I was talking about that transition out of sport, and even showing athletes those skills that you have learned through sport that can set you up in a business environment. I think we also need to help athletes understand that there are certain skills that they can develop that may seem that they're natural to them, and so they don't understand that it's actually something that is a skill that they've learned and been able to strengthen, which will then help them in other areas. It was one of the reasons why I did the Leadership Series conference for those young girls, to really highlight some of those skills and life lessons that we can learn through sport. And so I think just showing them exactly what those things are, even if it's goal setting and how to break down, you're trying to get to the Olympics in 4 years. Well, what do you need to do to break that down and get backwards so that today you know what you're doing the next day into small, manageable chunks? I mean, these are skills as well that, you can use anywhere in life. So just highlighting those, what they're actually doing, and showing them how they practically apply into the real world, I think is part of that education you can use sport for.
Thank you for the great work that you do.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks, everyone.